So there's two bakes for this pipe version. If you want it to be a bit more melty, less of a crisp to it, then the lighter bake will probably be more for you. As you can tell, it's pretty light throughout. As you can see, this one has a golden base, and it will have more of a snap and crunch to it as well. It will still have a melty texture once you bite into it, but this really will just pretty much melt in your mouth, I would say. Given that the light version of the pipe and the rolled out version are both melty, you're also going to be wondering what the difference really is. So this one here will have more of a lighter texture to it because we've whipped the egg whites quite a bit along with the butter. Whereas this one, whilst it melts in your mouth, it's a little bit more dense. It really comes down to what your preference is. Do you prefer something that's a bit lighter or something that's a bit more crumble to it? So these are the tools that you'll need for the melty version. These are 0.6 cm rulers, which are basically 6mm rulers, which will allow us to roll the dough out to that thickness. And another thing that you'll need is a cookie cutter. Now I'm using this Tart cutter over here, but you don't actually need to use this. So if you don't have this, you can use a regular cookie cutter to cut out the shape of the cookie. You could use a flower one, or you could just use a regular circle one, that works too. And what you could do is that to get the indent, which this step will give me, you could use the back of a teaspoon and simply press down on the dough once you've sliced out your cookie. And this will give you that indentation that you'll need to pipe the Nutella into the cookie. Alternatively, you could just simply cut it out without any indentation on it, to be honest. All this indentation does is to provide more Nutella within each bite. So with the crispy version of the cookie, we're gonna need to use piping bags and piping tips for it. In this instance, for the base itself, we're using number 7, a star tip over here, as you can see. And for the Nutella bit on top, I'm gonna use a number 5, which is a bit smaller, and also a star tip. You could use any shaped piping tip, to be honest, but I prefer using the star one because it looks a bit nicer. So I'll be using the number 5 piping tip for the Nutella topping on both of the cookie bases, both the melty version and the crisp version. Now you could omit using a tip. You could just use a piping bag or a Ziploc bag and just slit open a small little corner and then pipe dollops on it. However, I prefer using piping tip just to make it look a little bit better. So as you will notice in both bases, I also use hazelnut meal. I just find that it actually brings out the flavor of the Nutella a little more. Given that, you know, it's a hazelnut base, it gives it a bit of texture as well, so it isn't too one-dimensional, and it makes eating the cookie and the whole texture of the cookie a bit better and nicer and more enjoyable in my mind. It also mellows down the sweetness of the Nutella itself. I'll put some alternatives on the blog itself. You could use almond meal instead of hazelnut meal. Custard powder wise, I'm using Foster's custard powder. I know that there are different types of custard powders that you can find, especially in the Asian grocers. The one that you find in the Asian grocers are going to be different. You could just replace each one. It will just affect the cookie slightly. Salt wise, I'm using fine salt. You still taste the salt granules in the base, to be honest, even though it's fine salt, but it's much better than the thicker, coarser version of the salt. So here's another version of the salt that I've got. It's slightly coarser than this one over here. Not sure if you can see a difference. So this is almost like a regular cooking salt, whereas this is a bit more of the finer salt. And I'm using pink salt here, but it really doesn't matter. The bigger the salt granules, the more you'll feel that pop of salt when you bite into the cookie. So I personally feel for shortbreads, the smaller one is a little bit more preferable. Flour wise, I'm using cake flour. You could use all-purpose flour, but to get that tender crumb, I feel that cake flour would be the better option. So yeah, there you have it. I think we've covered most of the ingredients, except, one second, milk powder. totally forgot about that. So in milk powder, I'm using full fat milk powder. I know a lot of recipes call for non-fat milk powder. I like using the full fat ones. It's not quite the same to interchange it. If you have the full fat version, please go for it. Otherwise, you could replace it. It just does affect the amount of fat in the cookie itself, obviously, and how it's going to turn out. But it's not going to be too massive given the fact that we're not using a huge amount of milk powder in the actual cookie base itself.